Hello and welcome to MRCPsych on the Go Revision Essentials. My name is Dr. Alapasurlicker and I'm a psychiatry trainee in the west of Scotland. Like many of you, I spent a lot of time commuting. This was valuable time that I could have spent revising for the MRCPsych examination. And so, I've started this podcast to help you revise on the go. Each episode breaks down one high-yield topic mapped to the syllabus. This is then followed by 5 questions to help reinforce your learning. So, grab your headphones, turn travel time into revision time, and let's get started. Why can a radar operator miss an obvious blip after 2 hours on shift, but catch it easily in the first 10 minutes? The problem isn't their eyesight, it's how alertness itself behaves over time. In episode 35, we explored levels of consciousness. Episodes 36 and 37 took a detour into Korsakoff's syndrome and Freud's theory. We're back on the states of awareness track now, turning to arousal and alertness. Quick note, we already covered the main theories of attention back in episode 9, so we won't repeat them here. This episode is about arousal and what happens to attention over time rather than in the moment. Arousal refers to your overall level of physiological and mental alertness, from deep sleep to intense excitement. It's maintained by what's often called the reticular activating system, though that name undersells it slightly. It isn't one neat structure. It's a network of nuclei running through the brainstem, properly called the ascending reticular activating system, that projects diffusely upward through the thalamus to the cortex, keeping it switched on and receptive. Several neurotransmitter systems feed into it. Noradrenaline from the locus coeruleus, acetylcholine from nuclei in the upper brainstem, serotonin from the raphe nuclei, and histamine from the hypothalamus. Together, they're what separates a cortex that's alive from one that's actually awake and responsive. Damage to this system, or to the thalamus it projects through, can produce coma or a persistent vegetative state. We touched on this briefly back in episode 19, linking arousal to the Yerkes-Dodson law. This law states that performance improves with arousal up to a point, then declines. That 1908 study was actually behavioural, not neurological. But the same inverted U pattern shows up here too. This arousal is driven by dopamine and noradrenaline acting on the prefrontal cortex. Remember, arousal is maintained by the ascending reticular activating system, a network of brainstem nuclei using noradrenaline, acetylcholine, serotonin and histamine projecting via the thalamus to keep the cortex alert. This system doesn't just hold a steady baseline, it also reacts. In the 1960s, the Russian psychologist Yevgeny Sokolov described the orienting response, sometimes nicknamed the "what is it" reflex. This response causes a sudden and automatic burst of attention and arousal. This is often triggered by anything novel or unexpected. A loud bang, a flash of movement, someone unexpectedly saying your name. Imagine a door slamming somewhere behind you right now. Notice how your attention would snap toward it instantly, with no decision involved at all. That's the orienting response. Sokolov also showed it fades with repetition, which he called habituation. The 10th slamming door gets far less of a reaction than the first. But change the stimulus even slightly, a different sound, a different rhythm, and the response returns immediately, called dishabituation. Physiologically, it's marked by a brief slowing of heart rate as the body pauses to gather information, followed by increased skin conductance. Remember, the orienting response is an automatic burst of attention and arousal to novel stimuli. Attention isn't just about what gets filtered in a single moment. it also has to be sustained. Vigilance is the ability to maintain attention over time, particularly for rare or unpredictable events. In 1948, the psychologist Norman Mackworth developed the clock test to study this, born out of a very practical wartime problem: radar operators, who missed rare blips on a screen after long shifts. Participants watched a clock hand make small, regular jumps and had to spot the occasional larger jump. Mackworth found that detection rates reliably fell the longer the task went on, now known as the Vigilance Decrement. Think back to the last long lecture or drive where you noticed your focus drifting after the first half hour, even though nothing about the task itself had changed. That's the Vigilance Decrement, not a failure of willpower, a predictable property of sustained attention itself. The same problem shows up today in air traffic control or long-haul driving. Remember, vigilance is the capacity to sustain attention over time. Detection performance on monitoring tasks reliably declines with time on task, called the Vigilance Decrement. Now, what happens when this baseline arousal system isn't tuned quite right to begin with? That brings us to Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, or ADHD. One influential model proposes that ADHD involves underactivation of these prefrontal arousal circuits, particularly the dopamine and noradrenaline pathways, rather than simple overactivity or excess energy. That explains something that seems paradoxical at first. Stimulant medications, methylphenidate and amphetamine-based treatments increase the availability of dopamine and noradrenaline. In someone without ADHD, that tends to increase arousal and activation. In ADHD, where these circuits are thought to be underfunctioning, the same increase brings the system closer to typical operating levels, improving attention and impulse control rather than causing overexcitement. It isn't a calming drug in the pharmacological sense, it's an underactive system being brought closer to baseline. Atomoxetine works on a narrower part of the same system. It's a selective noradrenaline reuptake inhibitor, targeting the locus coeruleus pathway specifically, and it's used as a non-stimulant option, particularly where stimulants aren't suitable or carry a risk of misuse. Remember, attention deficit. Hyperactivity disorder is associated with underactivation of dopaminergic and noradrenergic arousal circuits. Stimulants raise dopamine and noradrenaline availability, bringing underactive circuits closer to typical function. We touched on delirium briefly before, and it connects directly to this same system. Delirium, an acute confusional state, is defined above all by a disturbance in attention and awareness, with a fluctuating course, distinguishing it from dementia, where attention is typically preserved early on, and decline is gradual rather than fluctuating. Acetylcholine, one of the neurotransmitters we just mentioned, matters here too. Anticholinergic medications, drugs that block acetylcholine, are one of the most common and preventable causes of delirium, especially in elderly patients who often have less cholinergic reserve to begin with. So really, this is the same arousal system we've covered all episode, just showing up in 3 different ways. Working normally, you simply feel awake. With specific circuits chronically underactive, it can look like ADHD. And acutely disrupted, sometimes by exactly the kind of drug meant to calm someone down, it can tip into delirium instead. We'll cover both ADHD and delirium properly in their own dedicated episodes further down the line. Now, let's test your recall. I'll read out 5 exam-style questions. After each one, I'll pause for 10 seconds so you can attempt it before hearing the answer. Question 1. What is the ascending reticular activating system? and name 2 neurotransmitters involved in it. A network of brainstem nuclei projecting via the thalamus to the cortex to maintain arousal. Neurotransmitters involved include noradrenaline, acetylcholine, serotonin, and histamine. Question 2. A sudden loud noise instantly grabs your attention, even when you're deeply focused on something else, but stops doing so if it keeps repeating. Name this phenomenon and the process by which the reaction fades. The orienting response, described by Sokolov, the reaction fades through habituation. Question 3. What is the vigilance decrement? The reliable decline in detection performance on a monitoring task the longer it continues. First demonstrated by Norman Mackworth using the clock test. Question 4. Why do stimulant medications like methylphenidate improve focus in ADHD rather than causing overexcitement? ADHD is thought to involve underactivation of dopaminergic and noradrenergic arousal circuits. Stimulants raise the availability of these neurotransmitters, bringing an underactive system closer to typical function rather than overstimulating it. Question 5. Why are anticholinergic medications a common and preventable precipitant of delirium, particularly in elderly patients? Acetylcholine is a key neurotransmitter in the arousal system. Anticholinergic drugs block it, and elderly patients often already have reduced cholinergic reserve, making them particularly vulnerable to acute disruption of attention and awareness. Let's summarise what we've learnt today. Arousal is maintained by the ascending reticular activating system, a brainstem network using noradrenaline, acetylcholine, serotonin, and histamine to keep the cortex alert. Sokolov's orienting response is an automatic burst of attention to novel stimuli that habituates with repetition. Vigilance, the ability to sustain attention over time, reliably declines the longer a task continues, called the Vigilance Decrement. Attention deficit. Hyperactivity disorder is linked to underactivation of dopaminergic and noradrenergic circuits. This is why stimulants and atomoxetine help rather than overexcite. Acute disruption of the same system, often through anticholinergic medication, can precipitate delirium instead. In the next episode, we turn to sleep, its structure, dreaming, and the states that unfold once alertness switches off altogether. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of MRCPsych on the Go Revision Essentials. I hope this episode helped to move your revision forward. If you have any questions or just want to continue the discussion, you can find me on LinkedIn at MRCPsych on the Go, spelled MRCPysch on the go. This podcast is about making revision accessible. If you found it useful, liking and sharing it with others helps the goal more than anything else. That's it for today. I'm Dr. Alapis Ehrlicher, and as always, keep revising on the go.